What was the most violent game of the 90s? Was it this one? Or maybe this one? They're both good guesses, but I have another candidate for the title. Greetings and welcome to Retro Games in Rally English. My name is Juho Kuorikoski. I'm a Finnish journalist and a non-fiction author, and I'm here to talk about old games in my very Finnish English. So, today I wanted to wear something red, but unfortunately the only piece of clothing I own in that color is this knockoff Chinese Iron Man glove, and now I am a bit worried that it is stuck in my hand. But the color red is going to be a general topic of today's video, because I'm going to talk about one of the most violent games released in the 1990s. And no, I'm not talking about Doom, Wolfenstein 3D or Mortal Kombat. Sure, those titles earned their respect in their extensive use of violence, but there is one other title that took the graphic violence to a whole new level. And that game, my friends, is Crusader No Remorse.
Released in 1995 by Origin Systems and Electronic Arts, Crusader No Remorse is one of the first games to use the SVGA screen mode. The game ran on a pimped out version of Ultima 8's game engine. And just on a side note, I can almost smell the irony. The hero in this game is the polar opposite of the avatar of the Ultima games. There's no virtues here. Set on an isometric perspective, the graphics are pre-rendered, but they still look quite pretty even today, especially when compared to the other games of the same era. Doom's low-resolution pixel violence is something else entirely when compared to this one. Crusader No Remorse was released only in CD-ROM, when many of the other games of the same era still got a separate floppy release. And to you millennials out there, the floppy disks look like this, and we used to store information on these. So they are not 3D prints of the save icons. Because of the CD-ROM and SVGA screen mode, the system requirements of the game were brutal. You had to own at least a 486 and several megabytes of RAM even to get the game running. On the other side, Crusader No Remorse was one of the best looking games of its time. In the bleak future, capitalism has finally taken over, and the whole world is controlled through the stock market. There are some who resist, and our friendly neighborhood Silencer is one of them. The main protagonist is a killing machine who wears a red armor and looks a lot like Boba Fett. You know, this minor side character of Star Wars whose story was about to get featured in a movie, before Disney's executives came to their senses. In the beginning of the game, our hero serves in the ranks of the other Silencers, who are the special forces of the World Economic Consortium, the organization of the capitalist scumbags who are running the show. When 3 Silencers are sent to take care of rebel forces, one of the Silencers turns against his brothers in arms, while Ed 209 clips the 2/3 of the team. For the surviving individual, the mayhem continues in the ranks of the rebellion. The gameplay itself combines action to puzzles. Your goal is to get keycards, flick switches and kill everything in sight. In 15 missions, you sabotage, steal, kidnap and whatnot. The opposition gets harder after each mission, but at the same time you get new weaponry to your toy chest. That's pretty much it, but thanks to certain details, the game keeps you engaged. Pro tip: always get rid of the surveillance cameras and other safety equipment first. If you trigger an alarm, you will have to deal with extra guards. But on the other hand, if you want to test out new gear, this is a very convenient way to do that. The environments are destructible. You can mow down almost anything you see on the screen. One of the pivotal ideas of the game was that firefights are brutal, so that should be seen on the screen too. Tony Zurovec, the man behind the game, has said that although he's been playing games his entire life, no game prior to Crusader No Remorse was able to convey the chaotic nature of combat. The chaos and mayhem of warfare quickly rose to the center of the game. Destructible environments are almost a game within a game. Zurovec has said that there's something cathartic in destruction, and I have to agree. Playing with firepower in a controlled environment is quite therapeutic, and it's very enjoyable. But the environments aren't the only destructive element in the game. The same goes for the enemies. If the architecture reacts to different weapons in the arsenal, same should be expected for the inhabitants of this digital world. In Doom and Wolfenstein 3D, you can butcher the enemies in a few different ways. You can shoot the enemies down or reduce them to bloody pulp with a bigger gun. But Crusader No Remorse is a totally different beast. There are so many ways to kill your opponent that it almost becomes an art form. The enemies vaporize, explode, turn to dust and get skinned alive. If the destructive environments are a game within a game, same can be said about the weapons. Finding a new weapon is always a moment of joy because you get to try that on the environments and enemies. The attention to details is astonishing. This is because of Zurovec's design philosophy. The only flaw in the general look of the game is the lack of light sources. This would have introduced another level of tactics to combat, but the game was already heavy as hell on the technical side, so it's understandable why there's no light and shadow. The controls are quite complicated, especially when compared to modern action games, where you control the main character with pretty much standardized set of controls, both in PC and consoles. Clunky controls aren't that big of an issue once you get your head around them, but it takes some time until your fingers hit the right keys on instinct. The pace of the game is quite low, so there's almost always time to consider your actions. However, there are some minor clipping bugs, as silencer warps occasionally in corners. Oh, and the guy in a red armor can't swim. All in all, Crusader No Remorse is quite an enjoyable puzzle shooter. It's actually quite surprising to see how well the game has aged.
It's easy to say that Crusader No Remorse is just a bunch of senseless violence porn with pretty graphics. And in some regard, that is the case. But there is more to the story. The game itself is a political statement, but as you have guessed it, the message is quite anti-capitalistic. And on top of that, Crusader No Remorse and its sequel, they form a game series that didn't bend to corporate demands.
Crusader No Remorse is made almost entirely by one man. The game is Tony Zurovec's pet project and somewhat of a personal crusade. Getting the game to shelves was no easy task, and Zurovec went to great lengths in order to get the game done. Zurovec has said that the game was inspired by Wolfenstein 3D, and because of this, Zurovec planned the game to be a first-person shooter in the vein of the great-grandfather of all FPS games. In the 90s, the 3D graphics was only a distant dream. The only real alternatives were Doom and Wolfenstein-inspired pseudo 3D game engines with cardboard cutout enemies, or a very low polygon count. For these reasons, Zurovec decided to use pre-rendered graphics but with high resolution. Because of this, the textures took so much space that the game was released only in CD-ROM. Zurovec went on a crusade of his own. People at Origin Systems and Electronic Arts weren't impressed on the selected technology, especially of the CD-ROM. Although optical media was gaining popularity, many games were sold on floppies. This combined to the insane system requirements made sure that only a small minority of gamers were able to play the game. On the marketing perspective, Zurovec was making only the wrong decisions. But the game was, and still is, beautiful. Presented in glorious 640x480 SVGA resolution, the game environments looked spectacular in the mid-90s. This, of course, took its toll on performance. The biggest bottleneck was scrolling. None of the reasonably priced PCs weren't able to scroll smoothly the game environments. This is why the game is set to static screens. The screen scrolls once silencer moves close enough to the borders. This was a sound compromise, as it made possible all the other graphical gimmicks. The idea for the main character came from not Star Wars, but from ancient Greece. Although Zurovec has stated he recognizes the resemblance with Boba Fett, he didn't pay much attention to it. The likeness, it's just a coincidence. Or that's what he's saying. The buckshot with a hero resembling Boba Fett surely got the attention of Star Wars fans. In the concept phase, one of the key elements was to hide Silencer's face. In the first drafts made by Beverly Garland, Silencer was wearing a regular helmet. But when Zurovec told Garland that he was an avid fan of Spartans, not Master Chief, you know, these guys, Garland drew a helmet with a T-shaped visor. While the final armor was taking shape, many of Zurovec's colleagues reminded him about the likeness with Boba Fett, but Zurovec didn't pay attention. After all, he was on a crusade. Everyone who's seen the movie 300 knows that Spartans like to wear red. The color of the silencer draws from Sparta, but also from technical reasons. If Silencer would have wore camouflage, he would have sunken in with the environments. Bright red hero is easy to spot. The color has also a narrative reason. As the Silencers are the elite force of the government, the red color strikes fear. The Silencers are a reminder to what happens if people try to start a revolution. The suits and bean counters at Origin and EA were convinced that Crusader No Remorse would be a flop, thanks to the hefty system requirements and the availability only on CD-ROM. Much to their surprise, the game was a commercial success. Because of this, EA wanted a sequel, and fast. The development of Crusader No Remorse took little under 2 years. Publisher wanted to capitalize from the surprise sales, so Zurovec was given 10 months to produce a sequel. Sure enough, Crusader No Regret hit the shelves 1 year later. Zurovec was promised to have royalties of the sales on top of his salary, but after release of Crusader No Remorse, publisher backed down. The directors of Origin System had given their word on the bonus, but EA thought differently. After a lengthy dispute over the royalties, Zurovec had enough and quit. That was the end of the Crusader games. Although Zurovec never visioned the game series to be a trilogy, there were plans for the third game. Instead of isometric puzzle action, the third game was planned to be an FPS game made with polygon graphics, but the game never survived through the concept phase. Zurovec wanted to take Silencer to space, so that there would be different environments instead of offices and factories. The third game would have been called Crusader No Mercy. The creator of the game series has stated that he's sorry for the death of the series, but at the same time Zurovec is glad that EA hasn't continued the saga on his own. Zurovec had made 2 games practically by himself and added some distinct features to them from his own persona. The themes conveyed in the story are a statement. A red warrior against a capitalist system. The world dominated by a stock market is a very Orwellian dystopy. Zurovec has said that he saw back in the 90s how economics were giving birth to an oligarchy, which would limit individual rights and focus the power to the wealthy minority. As the government tightens its grip, violence is the only outcome. In the dystopian world of Crusader No Remorse, silencers are making sure that the public stays in line. If the people open their mouth, government silences them. Zurovec has said that the both Crusader games were his take on the present state of affairs back in the 1990s. He's also said that the themes of the story are now even more relevant. It's often said that there needs to be a revolution for things to change. Even today, inserting a political message to a commercial game is quite rare, especially anti-capitalistic one. And think about it, EA published this game. The circle of irony would be complete if EA would give Crusader the same free-to-play mobile game treatment it gave to Dungeon Keeper. Tony Zurovec's personal crusade ended with a beef with EA. He was a man of his words, by sticking it to the man. He killed something he created by doing it. He earns my respect.
So, it's been over 20 years since the release of Crusader No Remorse, and the games have evolved quite a bit, especially action games, a genre that usually boasts with the most recent graphical advances. Crusader's pre-rendered graphics, they still look quite nice, and the gameplay itself has aged quite well too. There is certain kind of appeal of finding new weapons and testing the firepower, and this metagame masks quite well the somewhat tedious nature of the rest of the game. The game is available at GOG.com, optimized for modern computers, and it costs roughly the same as a doctor's appointment here in this socialistic nightmare you know by the name Finland. All in all, Crusader No Remorse, it's quite a nice action game, and it has aged quite well. Obviously, the shock value of the violence has faded, but in my opinion, this game is far more brutal than the games that the people were fussing about back in the day. But that's enough crusading for one day. The race was hard and tire was bad. Kuorikoski out.